For those who don't know much about Frida Kahlo aside from her popularity, it would be hard to conceive that, for a while, she was mostly known for being Diego Rivera's wife. This now infamous Detroit News article illustrates this perfectly. Wife of the master mural painter gleefully dabbles in works of art. The article, however, doesn't belittle her work, calling her style skillful and beautiful. It was written in 1933. Kahlo and Rivera had been in the United States for 3 years now. Kahlo was 26, Rivera was 47. In this video, I want to look at 3 paintings made during these 3 years Kahlo spent in the United States because, as Celia Starr, author of Frida in America, The Creative Awakening of a Great Artist, states, it was this journey to the United States that made Señora Rivera the world-famous Frida Kahlo. Frida and Diego arrived in San Francisco in November 1930. Rivera was openly critical of the increasingly authoritarian Mexican president Plutarco Elias Calles as communists were being imprisoned under his rule. Rivera was himself a communist, though not a member of the Communist Party, as he criticized it for its Stalinism. As you can imagine, that made it harder for Frida and Diego to get a visa to work in the United States. However, Diego was friends with Albert Bender, the most powerful art patron in San Francisco, who was able to use his influence to get the couple into America. Diego was able to go to San Francisco, where he'd paint murals at the San Francisco Stock Exchange and at the California School of Fine Arts. While Diego worked, Frida socialized, made friends, and worked as well. She painted Frida and Diego Rivera in 1931. This was made 2 years after their wedding, 3 months after Diego had an affair with another woman, though that wouldn't be uncommon during their relationship. This is often considered a wedding portrait. You see Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo at complete opposites. One is huge, the other tiny. The difference in their feet sizes, for example, is exaggerated. This doesn't mean that Kahlo is less important in the composition. She might not fill the frame like Diego does, but she definitely stands out by how colorful she is. She embraces her Mexican roots through her shawl, her dress, and her jewelry. Finally, a bird carries a banner on which you can read, "Here you see us, me Frida Kahlo with my dearest husband Diego Rivera." I painted these pictures in the delightful city of San Francisco, California, to our companion Mr. Albert Bender, and it was in the month of April of the year 1931. To thank Albert Bender, Frida gave him this painting. This, according to Celia Starr, was a brilliant career move. Albert Bender, as I mentioned earlier, was the most powerful art patron in San Francisco, and having your work in his collection gave you legitimacy. However, if she had done a portrait of Bender, that portrait might have been forgotten as a portrait made by an obscure Mexican artist. So she gave him a self-portrait, which, by depicting herself, would take her out of obscurity and, with the presence of Diego Rivera at her side, would gain interest and attract curiosity. The banner reminding the viewer that she, Frida Kahlo, painted these pictures definitely helps the theory that this could have been the breakthrough artwork Kahlo was hoping it would be. I'm not entirely sure Kahlo thought all of this through as a strategy to get her career started. For example, she does portrait Diego with a palette, showing that he's an artist while she doesn't have one. There's also the fact that the banner is in Spanish, which, if it was included to get recognition, would have probably been written in English. In any case, the artwork did get attention. It was shown in the San Diego Museum of Art in 1935 and at the Boston Institute of Modern Art in 1941, and would get criticism. Interest in the canvas lies mainly in the fact that it was painted by the wife of Diego Rivera rather than any value it may have in the world of art. In June 1931, they'd visit New York City, go back to Mexico, to then arrive in Detroit in April 1932. Diego had been commissioned by the Detroit Institute of Arts to paint a mural. In Detroit, Kahlo was pregnant. She had already miscarried in 1930 because of her fractured pelvis and other medical issues, but through doctors she met in America, she was hoping she could keep the baby. However, only 2 days before her 25th birthday on July 4th, 1932, she miscarried again. She spent 13 days at the Henry Ford Hospital. Henry Ford Hospital Flying Bed would be the title of this painting, made to represent this event. The small and vulnerable Frida is bleeding, naked in bed. Linked to her through an umbilical cord are little Diego, the lost fetus, a snail symbolizing the slow and agonizing pain of the miscarriage, an anatomical figure and a pelvis which represent the reasons for the tragedy, some medical equipment, and finally, an orchid which Diego had brought her to the hospital. The bed floats in a barren and dead landscape. On the horizon, cold, lifeless industry serve as a background. Frida would become known for her deeply personal self-portraits, and this painting about grief is probably the most vulnerable she ever made. Frida Kahlo's life was tumultuous, to say the least, and her early 20s, as she traveled in the United States, reflected that. These incredibly formative years shaped her as an artist, of course, but also as a feminist, an activist, and a communist. It also heavily influenced her sense of belonging to Mexico, and she constantly missed it throughout her voyage. Let's end this video on this painting, Self-Portrait at the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States, made in 1932. It really wraps up Frida's 3-year voyage to the United States and reveals her feelings towards this country, especially by comparing it to Mexico. In it, you see two landscapes intersecting at Frida's figure. On the left, you have Mexico with its history, warmth, nature, and mythology. On the right, you have the United States with its industry, its technology, and its coldness. There's a clash between what is natural and what is artificial. The only thing linking both worlds together is the pedestal, which is powered by both nature and a machine. I feel, when I see this painting, that Frida Kahlo is making a choice. There definitely seems to be a preference for the liveliness of Mexico rather than the lifelessness of the United States. That being said, she admired the United States' industrial progress. I'm going to leave you with this quote by Frida herself. High society here turns me off, and I feel a bit of rage against all these rich guys here, since I have seen thousands of people in the most terrible misery without anything to eat and with no place to sleep. That is what has most impressed me here. It is terrifying to see the rich having parties day and night while thousands and thousands of people are dying of hunger. Although I am very interested in all the industrial and mechanical development of the United States, I find that Americans completely lack sensibility and good taste. They live as if in an enormous chicken coop that is dirty and uncomfortable. The houses look like bread ovens, and all the comfort that they talk about is a myth. There's so much I could have covered, and if you're interested in learning more, I invite you to read Frida in America by Celia Starr. It's a great read, and it's kind of funny to sometimes read what Frida thinks of Americans. Sometimes she's like, she really likes them, sometimes she doesn't. There's also like her fascination for Chinatown, which is kind of interesting. You know, it's not really something that we really hear about. But yeah, anyway, fascinating read. I recommend it, and yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing. But I bet you already did. You probably already subscribed and you probably already liked. So it doesn't really matter if I tell you. Comment. I read the comments. Sometimes I don't necessarily react or answer, but I read them. That is the truth. Sometimes I post them on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. For the support, I'd like to thank, as always, Roman Brandel, X Townsend Jeff, and all the other patrons who support the channel. It's extremely appreciated. As always, you already know that. If you want to check out patreon.com/canvas to support this channel, please do. Happy 4th of July, I guess, to all the Americans. I find myself funny. Okay. I think this is enough. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, goodbye.